Good evening, everyone. Tonight we are covering Batman Arkham Asylum, the 2009 action game developed by Rocksteady Studios. If you enjoy what we do here, please consider leaving a like, subscribing to the channel, and dropping a comment with whatever game or story you would like us to cover next. It genuinely helps. Now get comfortable, and let us begin. The story we are going to tell tonight takes place over the course of a single night. The location is a single island, a few acres of rock and old stone rising out of the water off the coast of Gotham City, and on that island sits a building that has been many things over the years. A family home, a psychiatric hospital, a prison, a monument to the particular kind of damage that Gotham does to the people who live inside it. The building is Arkham Asylum, and by the time the night we are going to describe is over, it will have been something else as well, a battleground. But to understand the night, you have to understand the place. And to understand the place, you have to go back much further than the events of the game. You have to go back to the family that built the building, and to the man who turned it into what it became, and to the city that made all of it inevitable. The building that would become Arkham Asylum was not constructed as an institution. It was built as a home, the Arkham family estate on the island that bears their name, a large Victorian structure that sat at the center of the island's grounds, and that served as the residence of one of Gotham's older families for generations. By the time the 20th century arrived, the Arkham family had contracted to a single branch, and that branch had contracted further to a woman named Elizabeth Arkham and her son, Amadeus. Elizabeth Arkham was mentally ill. The specifics of her condition are not fully detailed in the game's documents, but the picture that emerges from the Arkham family history, which is one of the most important documents in the entire game and is presented through pages hidden throughout the asylum for the player to discover, is of a woman whose grip on reality was fragile and became progressively less stable as Amadeus grew older. She heard things, she saw things, she experienced the world through a perceptual framework that did not correspond to the one shared by the people around her. In the language of the time, she was simply mad. In more contemporary terms, she was suffering from a severe psychotic disorder that was not being treated in any meaningful way because the treatment options available in the early 20th century were limited and largely ineffective. Amadeus grew up in that house with that mother. He was an intelligent and sensitive child, and his childhood was shaped by the experience of watching someone he loved suffer from something that neither of them could fully understand or address. The house itself became associated in his mind with his mother's illness, the specific rooms and corridors and the particular quality of light in different parts of the building taking on the character of the experiences that had happened within them. He left as soon as he was able to, went to university, studied medicine, and specialized in psychiatry, which in the context of his personal history was not a random professional choice. He wanted to understand what had happened to his mother and to develop the capacity to help people like her. He trained in Europe, where psychiatric practice was more developed than in America at the time, and he developed a genuine expertise in the treatment of severe mental illness. He came back to Gotham with a medical degree, a psychiatric specialization, and a plan. The family estate was large enough, and the grounds sufficient to support a proper psychiatric facility, and Gotham, which had always generated more than its share of people with severe mental illness, had no institution of quality dedicated to their care. He would convert the family home into a hospital. He would use the place that had been defined by his mother's suffering to help people who were suffering in similar ways. He wrote in his journal, entries from which are preserved in the game's hidden documents, about the hope he had for the project. He believed in what he was doing. He believed that the right environment, properly designed and properly staffed, could help people who had been written off as hopeless. He believed in the possibility of recovery for people that the surface world had decided were simply broken. The language of his early journal entries is that of a man who has found his purpose and who is approaching it with the combination of professional rigor and personal investment that comes from having a stake in the outcome that goes beyond the professional. He married. He had a daughter, a girl named Harriet, and his journal entries from this period describe a domestic life that was full and apparently happy, the kind of life that his childhood, defined by his mother's illness and by the fear and the helplessness that came with it, had not prepared him to expect. He had built something, a family, a professional purpose, a facility that was beginning to do the work he had always intended it to do. He had taken the thing that had most damaged him and turned it into something that might prevent similar damage in others. Then a man named Martin Hawkins was admitted to Arkham Asylum. Hawkins was a patient with a history of severe violence, a man whose mental illness expressed itself in ways that made him extremely dangerous to the people around him. The details of his admission and his treatment are in the records that Amadeus kept, and those records describe a clinical relationship that Amadeus approached with the same professional care he brought to all his patients. He believed Hawkins could be helped. He worked with him consistently and recorded his observations with precision. While Amadeus was away at a conference, Hawkins escaped from his room. He found his way to the Arkham family quarters within the facility. He killed Amadeus's wife and daughter. Amadeus came home to what Hawkins had done. The journal entries from this period are not clinical. They are the writing of a man whose world has been destroyed, who is trying to process something that cannot be processed through any of the frameworks he has spent his professional life developing. He had built the asylum to help people like Hawkins. He had believed in the possibility of their recovery, and the direct result of that belief was the death of everyone he loved. He did not close the asylum. He continued working. He continued seeing patients and recording his observations and maintaining the institution he had built. But something had changed in him, and the journal entries from the months that followed document that change with a clarity that is deeply uncomfortable to read. His language shifts. His observations about his patients begin to take on a quality that is harder to characterize as clinical. He begins to write about darkness in ways that suggest the darkness he is describing is as much internal as it is a feature of the people he is treating. He eventually killed Hawkins. The method he used is not described in neutral clinical language in the documents the game provides, and the implication is that it was not quick. He concealed the death as a natural one, and the records show no indication that anyone at the time suspected otherwise. He had become, inside the walls of the institution he had built to treat people who did harm, someone who was capable of doing harm himself. His own mental deterioration continued after Hawkins's death. The journal entries become increasingly difficult to follow. The handwriting changes. The observations he records about his patients begin to blur with observations about himself in ways that suggest the boundary between the two is dissolving in his perception. He began to believe that the house was communicating with him, that the building his family had lived in, and that he had converted into a hospital carried within its walls a kind of malevolent awareness that was speaking to him in ways others could not hear. He was eventually committed to his own asylum. He lived out the remainder of his life as a patient in the institution he had founded, surrounded by the people he had intended to help, deteriorating in the same building where his mother had deteriorated before him. The records of his final years are sparse and clinical in the way that records kept by staff about patients tend to be, without the personal dimension that his own journals had provided. He died inside Arkham Asylum, and he was buried on the island. The institution he left behind was not the one he had imagined when he planned it. It was operational, and it continued to function as a psychiatric facility, but the founding vision of a place where genuine healing could happen had been compromised by everything that had occurred within its first generation. The building carried the weight of what had happened in it, the way that buildings in which significant things have occurred sometimes seem to do, and that weight would only increase as the decades passed and the institution accumulated more history. By the time the game takes place, Arkham Asylum has been through multiple administrations, multiple periods of reform and decline, and has acquired a reputation that is as much about containment as it is about treatment. Its most famous residents are not the people who have been helped by its programs. They are the people who have made it their home in a more complicated sense. The villains of Gotham, whose relationship with the asylum is a recurring cycle of commitment and escape that has repeated itself so many times that it has become almost a feature of the city's landscape rather than a failure of the institution. The building itself, as the player encounters it in the game, reflects this history. It is large and Gothic and has the particular atmosphere of a place that has seen too much to be entirely comfortable. The original family home is still visible in its bones, in the proportions of certain rooms and the character of certain corridors, but it has been extended and modified and adapted over decades until it is something considerably larger and more institutional than the house it began as. It sits on its island in the water off Gotham's coast, and it can be seen from the city on clear days, a silhouette against the sky that Gotham's residents have long since stopped really seeing because it has simply always been there. To understand why Arkham Asylum exists and why it is always full, you have to understand Gotham City. Gotham is not simply a backdrop for the Batman stories. It is a character in its own right, with a history, and a personality, and a set of conditions that are as important to understanding what happens in it as any of the human figures who move through it. Gotham is a city that seems, in some fundamental way, to be organized around the production of extremity. The wealth in Gotham is more extreme than ordinary wealth. The poverty is more extreme than ordinary poverty. The crime is more organized and more theatrical than crime in other cities. The corruption runs deeper and has lasted longer. The people who emerge from Gotham's particular combination of conditions tend to be more intensely themselves than people formed in less pressurized environments, and the ones who break tend to break in ways that are more dramatic and more permanent than ordinary breaking. The city's architecture reflects this quality. Gotham was built in layers, different eras of construction piled on top of each other, without the kind of systematic urban planning that might have produced a more coherent environment. Art Deco towers stand next to Victorian stonework. Industrial infrastructure runs alongside residential neighborhoods that look as though they belong in a different century. The overall effect is of a city that has grown by accretion rather than by design, each generation adding to what the previous one built without fully reckoning with the cumulative result. The gargoyles and the Gothic ornaments that appear throughout Gotham's older architecture are not decorative choices in any conventional sense. They are expressions of something that the city's builders seem to have understood about the place they were building in, that it required a visual language capable of acknowledging darkness rather than pretending it was not there. The political history of Gotham is one of sustained corruption. The city has had honest mayors and honest police commissioners, individuals who came into office with genuine intentions and who found that the institutional machinery they had inherited was so thoroughly penetrated by criminal influence that working within it honestly was nearly impossible. The organized crime families that have controlled significant portions of Gotham's economic life for generations have their counterparts in the city government, and the police department, and the judiciary, people whose official roles give them the ability to protect criminal operations from the consequences they would otherwise face. This is not a new condition. It is a settled feature of how the city works, and it has persisted through multiple attempts at reform because the interests it serves are too deeply embedded in the institutional fabric to be removed by any individual reformer, however determined. The poverty in Gotham is concentrated in specific districts, areas of the city that the various reform efforts of different administrations have consistently failed to reach in any meaningful way. The Narrows is the most notorious of these, a dense and deteriorating section of the city where the population density is high and the resources available to residents are minimal. The people who grow up in the Narrows are not growing up in circumstances that are likely to produce stability or conventional success, and the pathways out of those circumstances are narrow enough that many people never find them. The crime that originates in the Narrows is the crime of poverty and desperation, which is a different thing from the organized crime that operates at higher levels of the city's economy. But the two forms reinforce each other in ways that make the overall situation worse than either would be independently. What Gotham produces at a consistent rate over its history is people who have been damaged in specific ways by specific features of the city's conditions and who express that damage in ways that are shaped by those conditions. The supervillains who populate Batman's world are not random. They are, in a meaningful sense, products of Gotham, people whose particular vulnerabilities encountered the particular pressures that Gotham generates, and who broke in the particular ways that those pressures produce. The Joker emerged from Gotham. Two-Face was Harvey Dent, Gotham's district attorney, a man who had spent his career trying to fix the city through legitimate means before the city broke him in a way that made legitimate means feel irrelevant. Scarecrow was a psychologist whose work on fear was shaped by his own experience of being afraid in a city that gives people a great deal to be afraid of. Arkham Asylum is, in this reading, not simply a psychiatric facility that happens to be located near Gotham. It is the city's most honest institution, the place where the people who have been most completely broken by Gotham's conditions end up, and where the city's relationship with its own damage is most visible. The fact that it does not work, that its residents escape and return, and escape again in a cycle that has been repeating for decades, is not a failure of the institution so much as it is a reflection of the impossibility of the task. You cannot fix in a hospital what a city is continuously producing. You can only manage the symptoms, and Arkham manages them badly enough that the management itself has become part of the problem. Batman understands this at some level. His journal entries and the conversations he has throughout the game reflect a man who is aware that the revolving door of Arkham Asylum is not something that more resources or better administration can solve, because the problem is not administrative. The problem is Gotham itself, and Gotham is not something that Batman can punch his way to a solution to. He can stop individual crimes and capture individual criminals and return them to the institution that will hold them until they escape again, and he does, night after night, year after year. But he cannot address the conditions that produce those criminals, and he knows it. This tension between what Batman can do and what actually needs to be done is one of the things that the game handles with more sophistication than the surface narrative might suggest. It is not just an action story set in a comic book world. It is a story about a man who has dedicated his life to a response to a problem that his response cannot actually solve, and who continues anyway, because the alternative is doing nothing, and doing nothing is not something Bruce Wayne is capable of. Bruce Wayne was 8 years old when his parents were killed. The specifics of the night are well documented within the Batman mythology, and the game does not dwell on them at length because it assumes familiarity, but the details matter enough to be worth covering clearly. Thomas and Martha Wayne were Gotham City's most prominent philanthropists, wealthy in the way that old Gotham money tends to be wealthy, with a depth and an established quality that goes beyond simple financial success. Thomas was a doctor, a man who used his resources to fund medical programs in the city's poorer districts, and who was known in Gotham as someone who took the obligations of wealth seriously. Martha was similarly engaged in the city's charitable life. They were, by any account, people who had done more with their position than simply enjoy it. They took Bruce to the cinema on the night it happened. Walking home through an alley in one of Gotham's less safe districts, a man named Joe Chill approached them with a gun. The robbery went wrong in the way that things go wrong quickly and irreversibly. Thomas and Martha were shot. Bruce watched them die in the alley, on the pavement, in the specific sensory detail that a traumatic memory preserves with a clarity that ordinary memory does not. The pearls from Martha's necklace scattered across the ground, the sound of the gunshots in the enclosed space of the alley. His father's hand going still. He was taken in by the Wayne family butler, Alfred Pennyworth, who had worked for the family for years, and who became, in the aftermath of the murders, the closest thing to a parent that Bruce had. Alfred is not a peripheral figure in the Batman story. He is the person who raised Bruce through the years that followed the murders, who maintained Wayne Manor and the Wayne family's affairs, and who has remained Bruce's most consistent and most honest relationship through everything that came after. His presence in the Arkham game is limited, but the audio diary entries and the conversations Bruce has throughout the game reflect a relationship that has the particular quality of a bond formed under pressure and sustained through decades of shared history. Bruce's response to his parents' deaths was not grief in any conventional sense, or not only grief, it was a decision. He was 8 years old, and he made a decision that would organize the rest of his life, which is either a remarkable act of will or a symptom of the particular kind of damage the night inflicted on him, depending on how you look at it. He decided that what had happened to his parents would not happen to other people if he could prevent it. He decided to dedicate himself to the prevention of the kind of violence and crime that had taken them from him. He spent the years that followed in preparation for that dedication. He traveled. He trained with the best martial artists and combat specialists he could find, in disciplines from multiple traditions, until he had developed a fighting capability that went beyond anything that conventional training could have produced. He studied criminology and forensic science and psychology, and every field that would give him the tools to do what he intended to do. He trained his body and his mind with a consistency and an intensity that reflected how completely the project had consumed him. He was not preparing for a career or a profession in any ordinary sense. He was preparing for a war, and he treated that preparation accordingly. He returned to Gotham and became Batman. The decision to adopt the bat as his symbol was practical as well as psychological. He needed something that would work on the criminals of Gotham in the way that his parents' murder had worked on him, something that would be felt in the gut rather than simply registered by the mind. Fear was the tool he chose, and the bat, which carries associations of darkness and the uncanny across multiple cultures, was the vehicle for it. The costume and the darkness and the specific way he chose to operate, from the shadows, without warning, with a deliberate cultivation of the appearance of something other than human, were all designed to maximize the psychological impact on the people he was targeting. The Batman who operates in Gotham by the time the game takes place has been doing this for years, long enough that his presence has become a settled feature of the city's landscape, rather than a novelty. Gotham's criminals know who he is, or know what he is, which is not quite the same thing. The Joker knows him better than anyone, which is a point we will return to. The police department's relationship with him has moved through several phases, from active hostility to the current arrangement under Commissioner Gordon, which is a working partnership that neither side fully acknowledges officially, but that both sides have come to depend on. His relationship with Arkham Asylum is one of the more complicated dimensions of his existence. He is the person who puts people in Arkham. He captures Gotham's supervillains and delivers them to the institution, and then watches them escape, and then captures them again, and delivers them again, in a cycle that has been repeating for as long as he has been operating. He is aware that Arkham is not working as a rehabilitative institution. He is aware that the revolving door dynamic serves no one well and may in some ways make things worse by giving everyone involved, including the villains, a predictable structure within which to operate. He continues because the alternative is not capturing the villains at all, which is worse, but the futility is not invisible to him. There is also a more personal dimension to his relationship with the asylum. Bruce Wayne's own mental state is not something the game addresses directly, but it is present in the subtext throughout. A man who watched his parents die at 8 years old and responded by spending the rest of his life dressed as a bat, fighting crime in a city that his efforts cannot fix, maintaining the fiction that he is doing so freely and by choice, rather than because he is unable to stop, is not someone whose psychological profile would be considered uncomplicated by any reasonable assessment. The Joker understands this and says so in various ways throughout the game. Batman operates on the boundary between sanity and the kind of obsessive fixation that, in another person, in different circumstances, might have produced a very different outcome. The Scarecrow sequences in the game, which we will cover in detail later, are the moments where this subtext becomes text. Batman's fear, his deepest vulnerability, is explored in those sequences in ways that are directly relevant to understanding him as a character. What he is afraid of is not simple, and it is not entirely what you might expect, and the game uses those sequences to ask questions about him that the action-oriented surface narrative cannot ask directly. The Joker has no confirmed origin. This is not an accident or an omission. It is a deliberate feature of the character, one that the Arkham game engages with directly through the patient interview tapes and through the Joker's own comments throughout the game. He does not have a real name that anyone can verify. He does not have a history that connects cleanly to the person he currently is. The files that Arkham maintains on him, which the player can access throughout the game, are notable for how little definitive information they contain, given how long he has been a resident. The most famous account of his origin, which appears in various forms across Batman's publication history, and which the game references through Joker's interview tapes, involves a man who had one very bad day, a failed comedian, a pregnant wife, a desperate decision to participate in a criminal operation at the Ace Chemicals plant in order to get money his family needed, a confrontation with Batman that went wrong, a fall into a vat of chemicals that bleached his skin white and dyed his hair green and left his face locked in the permanent rictus grin that defines his appearance. The trauma of all of it compressed into a single night, breaking something in his mind that was never repaired. The game does not confirm this origin. The Joker tells versions of it in his interview sessions and then contradicts or qualifies those versions in ways that make clear he either does not remember his past accurately or does not choose to represent it accurately. He finds the ambiguity useful. He has told so many stories about where he came from that none of them can be verified, and he appears to prefer it that way. A man without a confirmed origin is harder to understand and harder to predict, and the Joker values both of those qualities in himself. What the game does confirm is what the Joker is now, and what he wants, and how he thinks. He is the most intelligent and the most dangerous person in Arkham Asylum, and he has been using his time there not as a patient receiving treatment, but as a planner conducting ongoing operations. His relationship with the asylum is not one of confinement. It is one of strategic positioning. He knows the building better than most of the staff. He knows the other patients and their capabilities and their weaknesses. He has maintained connections to his criminal organization on the outside throughout his various commitments, and the operations he has run from inside Arkham over the years have been, by any measure, more successful than they should have been given that he was theoretically in a secure psychiatric facility. His relationship with Batman is the central relationship of his life, and he is more honest about this than Batman tends to be. The Joker does not simply want to cause chaos or commit crimes in any general sense. He wants to engage with Batman specifically, to test him, to push against him, to find the limits of what Batman will and will not do. He is fascinated by the question of how much pressure it takes to break the rule that Batman has organized his life around, the rule that he will not kill, and he has spent years applying that pressure in various ways to find out. The answer, so far, is that the rule holds. But the Joker does not read this as a defeat. He reads it as evidence that the test is ongoing, and he is patient. The Joker's plan for the night of the game begins with a performance of surrender. He allows himself to be captured. He is brought to Arkham by Batman, who is present to deliver him personally because something about the ease of the capture feels wrong. Batman's instincts are correct. The Joker has arranged to be brought in. He has spent the period leading up to this night positioning his people throughout the asylum staff and among the patient population, and he has arranged for access to something that will change everything once he is inside. The performance of being captured is the first act of a plan whose full dimensions Batman does not yet understand. His relationship with Harley Quinn, his psychiatrist-turned-accomplice, is the mechanism through which most of the operational groundwork has been laid. We will cover Harley in detail in the next chapter, but her role in the night's events begins well before the Joker is brought through the asylum's doors, and understanding what she has done in preparation for his arrival is essential to understanding how the plan unfolds. The Joker's voice throughout the game, provided with remarkable skill by Mark Hamill, who had been voicing the character since the 1990s animated series, carries a quality that is difficult to describe precisely. It is cheerful in a way that is not reassuring. It is intelligent in a way that is not comfortable. There is a consistency to his cheerfulness that suggests it is not a performance so much as it is a genuine state, which is more disturbing than if it were obviously performed. He finds things funny. He finds Batman funny. He finds his own situation funny. The humor is real, even if nothing that generates it corresponds to anything that would register as funny to an ordinarily functioning person. He has been using the Titan formula, a substance derived from the venom drug used by Bane and developed by Dr. Penelope Young at Arkham, in a way that is connected to his plan for the night. The Titan formula dramatically increases the physical size and strength of whoever takes it, at the cost of significant mental deterioration. The Joker has been injecting himself with a prototype version that he obtained through his connections within the asylum, and the effects on his body are visible throughout the game in ways that the player registers before the full implications are explained. He is dying. The formula is killing him. He knows this, and it has affected his calculus for the night in ways that make him more dangerous rather than less. Because a person who has decided they have nothing to lose is not constrained by the same considerations as someone who still values their own survival. What the Joker wants from the night is layered. He wants to humiliate Batman within the walls of the institution that Batman has been filling with his enemies for years. He wants to use the Titan formula to create an army of transformed prisoners and guards that will demonstrate what he has been planning. He wants to see how Batman responds to a situation that has been designed specifically to push him to his limits. And underneath all of that, he wants to have a conversation with Batman that the normal conditions of their relationship do not permit. A conversation about what they are to each other and what the purpose of their ongoing conflict actually is. The game gives him that conversation, in pieces, across the full length of the night. It is not a comfortable conversation, but it is an honest one, in the way that the Joker tends to be honest when he chooses to be, which is more often than people expect. Arkham Asylum, on the night the game takes place, is home to a population of inmates whose individual histories are as important to the story as the building itself. Each of them arrived through a different path, and each of them represents something specific about what Gotham does to people and what the asylum has made of the people it was supposed to be treating. The game provides detailed patient files, interview recordings, and environmental details that together build a picture of each major inmate, and those details are worth exploring carefully. Harley Quinn's story begins not as an inmate, but as a staff member. Her real name is Harleen Quinzel, and she came to Arkham Asylum as a psychiatric resident, a young doctor at the beginning of her career who was assigned to work with the asylum's most difficult patients as part of her training. She was intelligent and ambitious, with a genuine aptitude for the interpersonal dimensions of psychiatric work, the ability to build rapport with patients and to create the kind of conversational environment where meaningful therapeutic exchange could happen. Her supervisors recognized her ability. Her patient load reflected it. She requested assignment to the Joker. The request was unusual enough that it should have raised concerns, but the combination of her academic credentials and her apparent confidence made the assignment seem manageable rather than alarming. She began their sessions, and what happened in those sessions was something that the game documents through her own audio recordings and through the records kept by her supervisors who noticed the change in her over the weeks that followed. The Joker read her. He understood her in the way that he understands almost everyone he encounters, quickly and thoroughly and with an instinct for where the vulnerabilities are. He saw her ambition and the particular form it took, her desire to be recognized as exceptional, to be the person who succeeded where others had failed, to be the one who finally got through to a patient who had defeated everyone who came before her. He played to that desire with precision, giving her the impression that she was reaching him, that their sessions were producing something genuine that no previous therapist had managed to produce. He told her things. Not true things, or not only true things, but things that were shaped to produce specific effects in her. He was charming and vulnerable in ways that he can perform with complete conviction when it serves his purposes. He told her versions of his origin that positioned him as a victim, as someone whose suffering was the source of his behavior rather than a choice he had made, and she responded to those versions with the empathy that her training had developed and that he was now exploiting with clinical precision. By the time her supervisors became concerned enough to review her case notes and her behavior, the relationship had already moved well past the boundaries of a therapeutic professional relationship. She had fallen in love with him, or with the version of him that he had constructed for her consumption, which is not quite the same thing but which felt, from inside her experience, like the same thing. She helped him escape on one occasion. She was dismissed from the asylum and lost her medical license, and she went to him, because by that point the identity she had built around being his therapist, the one who understood him, had been replaced by an identity built around being his partner, and she had no path she could see back to the person she had been before she requested that assignment. She is now, by the time of the game, as institutionalized as any of the patients she once treated, in the sense that her life is entirely organized around the Joker and around serving his purposes. She has acquired skills that she did not have as a psychiatrist, fighting capabilities and a comfort with violence that reflect the life she has been living since she left the asylum's staff. She is also, in ways the game presents with some care, still recognizably Harleen Quinzel underneath the persona she has built. The intelligence is still there. The capacity for the kind of insight that made her good at her original work is still there. She simply applies it now in a direction that has nothing to do with helping anyone. Her role in the night's events is significant. She has been inside the asylum in the period leading up to the Joker's planned takeover, using her status as a known figure to the staff and her residual familiarity with the building's operations to position things and people where the Joker needs them. She is the operational arm of the plan within the asylum's walls, and she executes that role with the same competence she brought to her original work, just applied to very different ends. Dr. Jonathan Crane was a psychologist and professor whose academic work focused on fear, specifically on the neurological and psychological mechanisms through which fear operates and the ways in which those mechanisms could be manipulated. He was brilliant, and he was cruel in the specific way that someone can be cruel when they have spent their professional life studying the most vulnerable dimension of human psychology and have decided that the appropriate response to that knowledge is exploitation rather than care. His own relationship with fear was not academic. He had been a fearful child, someone who had been bullied and tormented in ways that left a lasting mark, and his intellectual obsession with fear was rooted in a personal history of having been its object. He understood fear from the inside, which made his academic work more sophisticated than it would otherwise have been, and it also gave his eventual turn toward using fear as a weapon, a quality that went beyond simple sadism. He was, in some sense, trying to control the thing that had controlled him. He developed a fear toxin, a chemical agent that induced severe hallucinations centered on the specific fears of whoever was exposed to it, surfacing the deepest terrors of the mind and presenting them with a vividness that was indistinguishable from reality to the person experiencing it. The applications of this toxin in his hands were not therapeutic. He used it on people, on students, on colleagues, on anyone who served as a useful research subject for understanding how the toxin worked and how its effects could be refined. He was committed to Arkham after a particularly significant incident in which his use of the toxin on others became impossible to ignore or to explain away. The asylum was, in the particular way that Arkham tends to receive people, not a resolution of his situation but a continuation of it. He continued his work. The resources available to him were different, but his commitment to the research was not diminished by the change in his circumstances. His appearance by the time of the game reflects his self-presentation as an embodiment of the thing he studies. He wears a Scarecrow mask and a degraded version of what was once an academic's clothing, and the effect is of someone who has decided to become the thing that frightened him rather than to overcome it. The toxin he uses in the game affects Batman in ways that the game presents through sequences that are among its most visually and narratively distinctive elements, pulling Batman into hallucinations where he confronts things that his ordinary psychological defenses are not designed to address. We will cover those sequences in detail when we discuss the night itself. Waylon Jones was born with a condition that expressed itself in his physical appearance in ways that made ordinary social integration essentially impossible. His skin had the texture and quality of reptilian scales. His physical size and strength were extraordinary. His features were not recognizably human in any comfortable sense. He was, from the beginning of his life, someone whose appearance determined how he was treated by the people around him, and he was treated badly. Badly enough and consistently enough that the person he became was shaped by that treatment in ways that are predictable and that the game documents without sentimentality. He became violent. He became a criminal. He developed a persona organized around the physical qualities that had made him an object of fear and rejection, inhabiting the role of monster because the world had decided he was one before he had any opportunity to decide otherwise. His crimes were brutal enough and his physical capabilities significant enough that he became one of Arkham's more securely held residents, confined in the sewers beneath the asylum in conditions that reflected the institution's assessment of what he required. His role in the night's events is territorial rather than ideological. He is not loyal to the Joker in any meaningful sense. He is operating within his own space, the sewers that have become his domain within the asylum structure, and he responds to incursions into that space with the predictability of something that has organized itself around the principle of defending its territory. Batman's passage through the sewers is one of the game's most atmospherically distinctive sections, a sequence in which the balance of power shifts away from Batman's usual position of tactical superiority towards something that feels genuinely threatening in a different register than most of the game's other antagonists. The game treats Croc with more complexity than the surface narrative might suggest. His patient file and the observations recorded by the asylum's staff describe a man who is not simply a violent animal, whatever his appearance and his behavior might suggest. He is someone who has been formed by specific conditions and specific experiences, and who has arrived at his current state through a comprehensible process, even if that process has produced something that is very difficult to engage with safely. The game does not ask you to sympathize with him in any sentimental way, but it does ask you to understand that he is not incomprehensible. Bane is the product of a prison that was not Arkham Asylum, which distinguishes him from most of the game's other major inmates. He was born in a South American prison called Peña Dura, serving a sentence that had been imposed on him for crimes committed by his father, which is to say that he began his life in a condition of imprisonment that he had not earned and from which there was no legitimate path out. He grew up in the prison, educated himself from whatever resources were available, and developed both intellectually and physically into someone whose capabilities were exceptional by any measure. The venom drug, which is the source of his enhanced strength and physical resilience, was something he was subjected to as an experimental subject in Peña Dura. The prison used its population as test subjects for various programs that would not have been conducted in any setting with oversight, and Bane survived the venom experiments and adapted to the drug in ways that its developers had not anticipated. He eventually escaped Peña Dura, and his subsequent history brought him to Gotham and to a confrontation with Batman that is one of the more significant events in the character's history. The moment when Bane broke the bat, which is the phrase the mythology uses for the incident in which he broke Batman's spine. By the time of the game, that history is established, and Bane is in Arkham as a result of subsequent events following his recovery. The venom that gives him his abilities has also, in the version of the character the game presents, taken significant things from him. His intelligence, which was genuine and considerable, has been degraded by prolonged venom use. The person who engineered an escape from Peña Dura and then orchestrated the systematic destruction of Batman's support network before physically defeating him is not fully present in the Bane that the game contains. What remains is formidable but reduced, and the game is aware of that reduction in ways that give the Bane sections a quality of pathos alongside the physical threat he represents. The Titan formula that the Joker has been developing is derived from Venom, and Bane's presence in the story is connected to that derivation in ways that the game makes explicit. He is, in a sense, an earlier iteration of the same experiment, and the game uses him to show what the Titan formula does at a certain stage of development before revealing what the Joker has produced with the refined version. Pamela Isley was a botanist whose work focused on plant biology and on the relationship between plant life and human environmental impact. Her transformation into poison ivy involved exposure to experimental chemicals in circumstances that the game's documents describe without resolving completely, and the result was a person whose physiology had been altered in ways that gave her a connection to plant life that went beyond anything that ordinary biology produces. She can communicate with plants in a functional sense. She can accelerate their growth. She produces toxins in her own body that she can use offensively. She is, in a specific technical sense, no longer entirely human. Her motivations are organized around the protection of plant life and of the natural world from human damage, which is a goal that is not without merit in the abstract, but that she pursues through methods that cause significant harm to people. She is not indifferent to human life in the way that the Joker is. She simply values plant life on terms that are comparable to how most people value human life, which means that when the two come into conflict, her calculus does not automatically resolve in favor of the humans. Her role in the night's events is one that begins as coerced and becomes something more complicated. The Joker has leverage over her through his control of the Titan formula's connection to the plants he has been using in its production, and he uses that leverage to bring her into the night's events in ways that she does not initially choose. What she does once she has that freedom is where the complication enters, and the sequence involving her in the game's later sections is one of its more visually distinctive and narratively interesting passages. Victor Zsasz is one of the more disturbing figures in the game's inmate population, and his patient file and the environmental details associated with him are worth understanding because they represent a kind of evil that the game presents differently from most of its other villains. He is not theatrical. He does not have an elaborate persona or a philosophical framework or a specific grudge that organizes his behavior. He is simply a man who kills people and marks each killing on his own body with a cut, a record kept in scar tissue of every person he has murdered. His history before his arrival at Arkham involved the loss of his family fortune and a subsequent period of despair that ended at a casino in a confrontation with Oswald Cobblepot, the Penguin, who won everything Zsasz had left at a card game. The experience of losing everything in a single night appears to have been the event that broke something in him. The specific mechanism of that breaking is not something the game explains with confidence. What it shows is the result. A man who no longer assigns value to human life, including his own, in any conventional way, and who has organized what remains of his existence around the act of killing. He is loose in the asylum during the night of the game, having been released as part of the Joker's takeover of the facility, and the sequences in which Batman encounters him are unsettling in ways that are different from the game's other antagonist encounters. He talks to Batman in a register that is calm and almost conversational. And the calm is more disturbing than aggression would be because it suggests someone who has moved past the emotional register in which violence feels like anything other than a neutral act. Edward Nygma does not appear directly in the main events of the game. His presence is felt throughout in the form of the riddles and trophies and hidden items he has placed throughout the asylum in advance of the night, a challenge laid out for Batman to solve while everything else is happening. His motivations are the most straightforwardly comprehensible of any of the game's villains, which does not make them less pathological. He needs to be the smartest person in any situation. He needs that to be acknowledged. His crimes are structured around proving his intelligence and around the assumption that no one, including Batman, can match it. His patient file and the interview recordings associated with him describe a man whose relationship with his own intelligence has been complicated from childhood by experiences that convinced him that being right, being the most capable person in the room, was the only reliable source of safety and value. The compulsion to demonstrate that intelligence, even when doing so is directly contrary to his own interests, is the feature of his psychology that makes him consistently catchable despite his genuine capability. He cannot stop himself from leaving the trail that leads to him because being caught having been too clever is preferable to not having demonstrated the cleverness at all. His role in the game is to provide a secondary layer of challenge and a secondary layer of narrative. the accumulated riddles and hidden items building a picture of the asylum's history and the histories of its inmates that supplements the main story. The audio tapes of the patient interviews, which are the most significant items in his hidden collection, are among the most valuable lore documents in the entire game. The Riddler's hidden challenge throughout the asylum includes, among its most significant items, a collection of recorded patient interview sessions conducted by the asylum's psychiatric staff. These recordings are the most direct access the game provides to the inner lives of its major characters, and they are worth covering in some detail because they contain material that does not appear anywhere else in the game's narrative. The sessions are not uniformly good psychiatry. Some of the interviewers are clearly out of their depth with the patients they are attempting to engage. Some of the sessions are conducted in ways that reflect institutional priorities, documentation, and risk assessment rather than therapeutic goals. But even the sessions that fail as therapy succeed as character documents because the way a person responds to a clinical interview, including the ways they resist or subvert or perform for the interviewer, tells you significant things about them. The Joker's sessions are the most extensively documented and the most discussed in the game's community, and for good reason. He is, as a subject, completely aware of what the interview process is designed to produce, and he treats each session as an opportunity to perform rather than to disclose. He tells different interviewers different versions of his history, contradicting previous sessions without apparent concern, and the effect over the course of the recordings is of a man deliberately constructing a documentation history that cannot be used to understand him. He is not hiding. He is actively making himself undiscoverable through the production of too many possible versions. In one recording, he describes a childhood marked by specific trauma, with enough detail to be plausible and enough emotion to be affecting. In another, he contradicts those details entirely, describing a different childhood, a different family, a different sequence of events leading to his current state. When the interviewer points out the contradiction, he responds with cheerful acknowledgement and no apparent concern, as though the contradiction is itself the point. He is not trying to be believed. He is trying to make the concept of being believed irrelevant. The sessions with Harley Quinn, conducted when she was still on staff and serving as his assigned therapist, are extraordinary documents of something going wrong in real time. The early sessions show her maintaining professional composure while clearly finding the subject compelling in ways that are already pushing against the appropriate boundaries of the relationship. Her questions are good, her observations are precise, but the quality of her attention to him is different from clinical attention, and it becomes more different as the sessions progress. In the later sessions, the inversion of the therapeutic relationship is audible. She is sharing things about herself in response to his questions. She is agreeing with his characterizations of the institutional environment in ways that align her perspective with his, rather than maintaining the clinical distance that would allow her to assess that perspective from outside it. He is asking her things that a patient should not be asking a therapist, and she is answering. The recordings are a document of someone being expertly and systematically dismantled by someone who understood exactly what he was doing to her. The sessions with Scarecrow are clinical in a way that the interviewer clearly finds difficult to maintain. Crane is cooperative in the sense that he speaks freely and answers questions, but the answers he provides are delivered from a position that is not subordinate to the interview process. He is assessing the interviewer with the same precision that the interviewer is attempting to apply to him, and his comments about fear, about the mechanics of the interview process as a mechanism for producing anxiety in the subject, about his own responses to the various stimuli the session involves, are those of someone conducting research rather than receiving treatment. He ends sessions by noting, with apparent sincerity, what he has learned from them. He means this literally. The sessions are data for him. The recordings from Killer Croc's sessions are among the most affecting in the collection because they document the gap between what Croc is capable of and how he is treated. He is not unintelligent. His responses to the interviewer's questions are often more perceptive than the questions that prompted them. He is aware of how he is perceived and has developed a clear-eyed view of what that perception has meant for his life that is not without analytical sophistication. But the interviewer in his sessions treats him in ways that reflect the surface assessment, responding to his appearance rather than to what he is actually saying, and the recordings capture his awareness of this in ways that are quietly devastating. There is a session in which Croc describes what it was like to be a child whose appearance made other children afraid of him, and the language he uses is simple and direct in a way that is more affecting than elaboration would be. He is not asking for sympathy. He is describing something that happened and noting what it produced in him. The interviewer's response is inadequate, and Croc's reaction to the inadequacy is to close down the session, returning to the monosyllabic responses that the interviewer had been working to move him past. It is a small moment that tells you more about him than most of the game's more dramatic sequences. Bane's sessions document the degradation that Venom has produced in someone who was clearly, before the drug, an exceptional thinker. The interviewer is conducting a cognitive assessment, and the results show a profile that is uneven in ways that reflect specific kinds of damage. Some functions are intact, others are significantly impaired. Bane is aware of the impairment in a way that is painful to engage with. He knows what he has lost. He can describe, in general terms, the difference between the person he was and the person he currently is, and the description he provides suggests that the loss registers as loss rather than simply as a changed state. The sessions with him have the particular quality of a conversation with someone who is present enough to understand what has happened to them but not present enough to do anything about it. Poison Ivy's sessions are contentious in a specific way. She does not accept the institutional framework of the interview as legitimate, and she says so directly and consistently. Her objection is not to the specific interviewer or to the specific questions, but to the premise that the assessment of her state should be conducted by a human institution using human values as the standard of reference. She makes the argument, in one session, that the category of mental illness as defined by human psychiatric practice is itself a framework built on assumptions about what constitutes normal and functional that she does not accept, and that applying that framework to her involves a category error that the interviewer is not equipped to address. The interviewer's response is to note her resistance to the process, which she immediately identifies as exactly the kind of response she was describing. The Zaz sessions are brief. He answers questions without elaboration, and the absence of elaboration is itself significant because it reflects the absence of the kind of internal life, the ongoing internal narrative, that most people bring to a conversation about themselves. He does not explain, he does not justify, he does not express anything that resembles the emotional register in which explanation and justification occur. The interviewer tries various approaches, and the sessions remain substantially the same regardless of which approach is tried. He is not withholding. He is not performing calm. He is simply not there in the way that the interview process assumes its subjects will be. The Batman interview that is included in the Riddler's collection is not conducted under formal circumstances and is not a typical patient session. It is a recording of an exchange between Batman and a staff member, and it is included because the Riddler, who placed it there deliberately, understands something about what it implies. The exchange captures Batman responding to questions about his own psychology in ways that are deflective without being evasive, maintaining the position that his methods and his choices are rational and purposeful rather than compulsive. The staff member asking the questions does not challenge this position directly. But the Riddler's placement of this recording alongside the patient sessions invites a comparison that the game trusts the player to make without spelling it out. The game begins with Batman delivering the Joker to Arkham Asylum. The transfer is routine in its procedure, which is itself a sign that something is wrong, because there is nothing routine about a voluntary capture by the Joker. Batman knows this. He says so to Commissioner Gordon, who is present for the transfer, and the concern in his voice is noted and not resolved because there is no obvious mechanism for acting on it. The Joker is in custody. He is being processed. The procedure is being followed. What more can be done? The asylum's processing area is where things begin to fall apart. Harley Quinn, who has been operating as a staff member inside the asylum in the period leading up to this night, has positioned herself at a key point in the facility, and when the moment comes, she acts. She has access she should not have. She uses it. The lockdown mechanisms that should contain the situation instead serve the Joker's purposes, and within a short period of the transfer being completed, the Joker is free within the asylum, and Batman is trapped inside with him. The Joker's first broadcast to the asylum, delivered over the facility's intercom system, sets the tone for the night. He is cheerful. He is pleased with how things have begun. He addresses Batman directly and personally, in a way that makes clear this night is designed around their relationship rather than around any general objective. He has released the patient population into the facility's common areas. He has taken control of the guard force through a combination of Harley's preparations and his own people who have been placed within the staff. The asylum is his. Batman's immediate priorities are establishing what has happened, locating Gordon, who has been separated from him in the initial chaos, and beginning to work toward regaining some control of the situation. The game structures his progress through the asylum as a series of objectives that take him through the facility's various sections, each one presenting different challenges and different encounters, and each one adding to his understanding of the scope of what the Joker has planned. The first Scarecrow sequence occurs early in the night, before Batman has fully mapped the situation he is in. Crane deploys his fear toxin in one of the asylum's corridors, and the effect on Batman is immediate and disorienting. The game shifts into a different visual register for these sequences, a distorted and nightmarish version of the asylum's environments in which the normal rules of the game's space are suspended. Batman is confronted with visions drawn from his deepest fears, and the primary fear that the first Scarecrow sequence surfaces is the one that has organized his entire adult life: his parents' death, the alley, the specific sensory details of that night, the giant figure of Scarecrow moving through the nightmare version of the environment, reaching toward him, and the task Batman is given is to advance through the sequence toward a lighthouse that represents clarity and control. What the Scarecrow sequences reveal about Batman is something the game handles with precision. His deepest fear is not violence or death in any abstract sense. It is loss, specifically the loss of the people he loves, in the way that he lost his parents. The fear toxin does not produce generic nightmare imagery. It produces imagery organized around the specific shape of his trauma, and the consistency of that imagery across the multiple Scarecrow sequences in the game tells you something important about what is underneath the armor and the training, and the carefully maintained control. The second Scarecrow sequence occurs in the medical pavilion, in circumstances that force Batman to confront the fear in a different form. The giant Scarecrow figure that moves through the nightmare environment is more developed here, more present, and the imagery is more elaborate. Batman's parents appear. Commissioner Gordon appears as a victim rather than an ally. The sequence is longer and the navigation through it more demanding. And what it asks of Batman psychologically is a version of what the Joker has been asking of him for years, to acknowledge what is underneath the surface of his presented self. The third Scarecrow sequence, which occurs later in the game, is the most significant. It begins as what appears to be a reset of the game, as though Batman has failed and is starting over from the beginning. Players who have not encountered this sequence before experience a few moments of genuine confusion, because the game presents the reset convincingly enough that it is unclear whether it is happening within the fiction or actually happening at a meta level. The sequence reveals itself as the deepest hallucination yet, and what it surfaces in Batman is the question that the Joker has been building toward throughout the night. The question of whether, underneath everything, Batman is capable of something he has ruled out, and what it would take to bring him to that point. Bane's role in the night involves the Titan formula. He has been used as a test subject for an earlier version of the formula, and the version he has been given has the effects that the game shows: a dramatic increase in size and strength, but also the deterioration that the Titan formula produces in less refined forms. The encounter with Bane is one of the game's more physically intense sequences, and it is structured to show both the threat that the Titan formula represents and the limitations of what it produces, which is power without direction, which is dangerous but not unconquerable. Poison Ivy's section of the night begins under duress. The Joker has leverage over her through his control of the Titan formula's plant-based components, and he uses that leverage to direct her to use her abilities to cover the asylum's grounds in rapidly growing and hostile plant life that complicates Batman's movement and creates additional threats. What she does once the leverage is removed is something the game allows to be genuinely ambiguous. She is not acting for the Joker, she is acting for herself, and her version of acting for herself involves releasing her full capabilities in ways that threaten the asylum and its surroundings on a scale that the Joker had not necessarily anticipated. The Batman and Ivy sequence is one of the game's more visually distinctive, taking place in the transformed asylum grounds where her plant growth has created an environment that is genuinely beautiful in a grotesque way, all enormous flowering vines and overgrown architecture in the darkness of the island. The encounter is less about combat and more about navigating an environment that has been fundamentally changed by someone with abilities that do not follow the same rules as the night's other threats. Commissioner Gordon's situation throughout the night is one of captivity and managed survival. He has been taken by the Joker's people and is being held as leverage, and his position changes as the night progresses. His relationship with Batman, which the game references through dialogue and through the history that both characters carry into the night, is one of the most important in the game's world, a partnership between a police officer who cannot officially acknowledge what he is doing and a vigilante who cannot officially exist, built on mutual respect and a shared commitment to protecting a city that consistently fails to protect itself. The Titan formula's full deployment comes in the game's later sections when the Joker moves toward the final phase of his plan. He has been producing Titan in the Asylum's facilities, and he intends to use it on a large scale, transforming a significant portion of the inmate and guard population into something he can use as an army. The game shows what this transformation looks like on individual people, the disorientation and the pain of the process and the result it produces, and the images are not comfortable. The people who are transformed are not improved or enhanced in any meaningful sense. They are ruined, their humanity subordinated to the drug's effects in ways that are not reversible. The Joker takes Titan himself in the game's final confrontation. His version of the transformation is different from what it does to others, partly because he has been injecting himself with prototype versions of the formula throughout the night, and his body has a different relationship to it than someone encountering it for the first time. What the transformation produces in him is enormous and monstrous in the visual sense, but the Joker underneath the transformation is still the Joker, still talking, still performing, still engaged with Batman in the same register that has defined their entire relationship. The physical scale has changed, but the dynamic has not, and the game makes a point of this. The conversation that runs through the final confrontation is the one the Joker has been building toward all night. He makes the argument, in his own way and in his own register, that Batman and he are not as different as Batman wants to believe. That the line Batman has drawn, the rule he has organized his life around, is not a moral principle so much as it is a preference, and that preferences can change under sufficient pressure. That the entire architecture of Batman's identity is built on top of a wound that has never healed, and that expresses itself as obsession rather than as recovery. He is not wrong about everything he says. That is what makes him effective. Batman does not cross the line. He defeats the transformed Joker without killing him. He returns him to the institution that has held him before and will hold him again until the next time. The night ends. The asylum is damaged and its population is in disarray, and a significant number of people have been hurt or killed. Batman is still standing. The Joker is still alive. And in the morning, when Gotham wakes up, everything will be more or less the same as it was the night before, which is either a victory or a commentary on the limits of what victory looks like in Gotham, depending on how you choose to read it. Arkham Asylum is, on its surface, a very good action game with a well-constructed story. But the surface narrative is doing something more interesting than it might initially appear, and the game rewards the attention you pay to its thematic layer with a coherence that is unusual in games of its genre. The game is about the boundary between sanity and madness, and about how permeable that boundary is in the specific environment of Gotham City and Arkham Asylum. It is about the ways in which the category of madness is constructed and applied, who gets to define it, and whose interests that definition serves. Amadeus Arkham built an institution to treat the mad and ended up mad himself. Harley Quinn was trained to help the mad, and was dismantled by one of them. The staff members who appear throughout the game are people who work every day inside an environment that is explicitly defined by extremity, and the question of what that does to them over time is one the game raises without fully answering. Batman himself occupies an ambiguous position in relation to the asylum's central category. The Riddler's placement of the recording of Batman alongside the patient recordings is the game's most explicit statement of this ambiguity, but it runs through everything. A man who lost his parents at 8 years old and responded by dedicating his life to a mission that cannot be completed, who dresses as a bat to frighten criminals, who maintains a secret identity that separates his public and private self completely, who has never sought treatment for the trauma that organized his entire adult life, who engages in a years-long cycle of confrontation with a person who wants to kill him and who he refuses to stop engaging with, is not someone whose psychological profile would be uncontroversial in a clinical context. The Joker understands this, and the game understands that the Joker understands it. His plan for the night is not simply to escape or to cause chaos in the general sense. It is to have a specific conversation with Batman in conditions that strip away the usual context of their encounters and force a more direct engagement with what they are to each other. He wants Batman to acknowledge in some form what their relationship actually is. Batman's refusal to make that acknowledgement is itself a kind of answer, and the Joker reads it as such. The Titan formula functions in the game's thematic layer as an externalization of something that the game has been exploring through more subtle means. It transforms people by amplifying one aspect of them, their physical power, while degrading everything else. It is a literal version of what the game suggests happens to people who come to Arkham, the intensification of one feature of their psychology at the cost of the complexity and balance that a functioning human being requires. The Joker's final transformation is the most extreme version of this, and the fact that he is still recognizably himself underneath it, still talking, still engaged with Batman on the same terms as before, is the game making a point about the relationship between the interior person and the exterior form that they present to the world. The ending is not triumphant in any clean sense. The asylum is restored to something like order. The Joker is in custody again. Batman is intact. But nothing has changed in any fundamental way. The conditions that produced the night, Gotham's ongoing capacity to generate the people who end up in Arkham, the institution's inability to do for those people what it was built to do, Batman's ongoing engagement with a mission that cannot be completed, all of it persists. The boat that surfaces in the water at the end of the game, carrying figures whose identities gesture toward what is coming in the sequel, is the game acknowledging that this was one night and that there will be other nights, and that the cycle will continue because the underlying conditions have not changed. What Arkham Asylum does better than most games is take its world seriously enough to ask what it actually means. Not just what happens in it, but what that means, about the people involved, about the institution that contains them, about the city that produced them, about the one man who has decided to fight it all alone at night in a bat costume because that was the decision he made when he was 8 years old and he has never stopped honoring it. The answer is not simple. But the game is not asking for a simple answer. It is asking you to sit with the complexity, and the world it has built is rich enough to make that sitting worthwhile. Arkham Asylum is a game that earns its reputation not through spectacle, though it has spectacle, but through the care it brings to the world it builds and the story it tells within that world. The history of the building, from Amadeus Arkham's hope for what it might be to what it actually became, is a story about the distance between intentions and outcomes, about the way that even the most sincere efforts to address suffering can become part of the structure that perpetuates it. The characters who populate the asylum's night are not cartoons. They are people who arrived at their current states through processes that the game takes the time to document and to treat with something approaching respect. And Batman himself, the figure at the center of it all, is presented not as a simple hero, but as someone whose relationship with his own mission is as complicated as anything he faces from the outside. The night on Arkham Island ends. Gotham continues. The island sits in the water, the building standing as it has always stood, waiting for whatever the city sends next. Thank you for spending this evening with us. If you made it all the way through, we hope it kept you good company on the way to sleep. If you enjoyed the video, a like and a subscription goes a long way toward helping us keep making these. And if there is a game, a character, or a world you would like us to cover next, drop it in the comments below. Have a great night, my friends.